Shabbat shalom, everybody. I want to begin by thanking Rabbi Strauss for the invitation he extended me today to deliver this morning's Devar Torah. The fact that I'm speaking today, or any rabbi speaking today, will come as no surprise to most of you. We expect to hear a rabbi speak when we come to the synagogue on any Shabbat morning. And in most synagogues of the world, regardless of the denomination, the rabbi traditionally, typically, will stand up at some point and deliver words of learning, of Torah, a message to take home with you. It is not so in some quarters of the Jewish world. In the very, very Orthodox, sometimes called the ultra-Orthodox, sometimes in the yeshiva world, especially in Israel, though the rabbi is permitted to speak whenever he wishes, the rabbi traditionally does not. Shabbats come, Shabbats go. No word from the rabbi. The rabbi may not even sit in front of the congregation except on those occasions when he does speak. And when does he speak? According to Jewish tradition, the rabbi is compelled to speak twice a year. On Shabbat Hagadol, the Sabbath before Pesach, and on Shabbat Shuvah, the Sabbath between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. On Shabbat Hagadol, the great Shabbat, the rabbi is compelled to speak about the laws of Passover, to remind the congregation of all the myriad details that are involved in celebrating the holiday. This is kosher, that is not. And today, on Shabbat Shuvah, to remind the congregation of something more spiritual, namely, that no matter how far we may have strayed from God or the Jewish faith in the year gone by, as we approach the holy day of Yom Kippur, Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, God will take us back and return us to himself. Shuvah Yisrael ad Adonai Elohecha, we just read in the Haftarah. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God. Those are the words with which the Haftarah began. And those are the words that God himself utters to come back, to come home, and to know that you and I will be accepted in his loving embrace. Sometimes it's hard to stay connected to our faith, especially when we are forcibly separated physically from both our place of prayer and our fellow Jews, as we have been these last many months. But even in normal years, it's not hard to lose that connection sometimes. And then suddenly we realize we haven't been in Beth Yeshurun since Rosh Hashanah a year ago. We haven't uttered a bracha over anything. And the only time we've spoken God's name has been in vain. We're still Jewish, but we don't feel it. We've lost it. Can we get it back? Can we return? On Yom Kippur, our tradition teaches that God opens his arms and says, come back. You will always have a place in my heart. Reconnect and return to your people. Shuvah Yisrael, God cries out. Return to me. The line we recite at the end of every Torah service suggests we not only want to, need to, but can. What did we just sing? Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuvah. Return us to you, O God, and yes, we will return. And that's why the most ultra-Orthodox rabbi in Israel, who may never preach, does preach today, to assure each worshiper, each congregant, that like E.T., you can go home to your God and to your people. But I think that this year there's another kind of return we might seek on this Sabbath of return. This year, many of us are asking the question that was so eloquently addressed by Rabbi Strauss on Rosh Hashanah. Can we really return? Can we ever return to the Jewish world that existed before COVID-19 took it away from us? Can we once again be the community of faith that filled this congregation for so many Shabbatot and holy days and B'nai Mitzvah and weddings? Can this synagogue and synagogues everywhere once again be the centers of Jewish life they were less than a year ago? Some great scholars and rabbis say no. The world has changed too much these last several months. Jewish life as we know it will never be the same. Tens of thousands of Jews around the world will not return. Our memberships will erode and people will drift away. These sentiments were first enunciated 6 months ago when we were in the midst of our initial quarantine back in March and April. Articles appeared in the Jewish press which speculated that the pandemic would destroy the central institutions of Jewish life and wreak havoc upon our Jewish community centers, camps, schools, and most significantly, our synagogues. For the first few months of the COVID-19 outbreak, much of what these analysts wrote seemed clairvoyant. Members of our congregation told me how much they enjoyed watching everything online, sitting on their sofa in their shorts and t-shirts, noshing as they listened to the rabbi's sermon, getting up, moving around, petting the dog. It was so nice, they said. It was a pleasure. But what might have seemed prophetic 6 months ago seems to have lost its inevitability. Rabbis report now that the number of people watching online has dramatically fallen off. And not because people have lost interest, but because they feel that fortunate as we are to have online services, they simply don't feel the same. Don't ignite that spiritual spark like actually being in the pews in person. Indeed, the biggest lament most people have had throughout this pandemic is the inability to be with their friends and extended family face to face. Synagogue affiliation rates have not dramatically declined, suggesting the overwhelming number of Jews who belong to synagogues have every desire to come back, to sit next to people they know, to schmooze with their clergy and fellow Jews at the Kiddush lunch. What people are saying is a paraphrase of 3 more words we sing when the Torah scrolls are returned to the ark. Yes, we sing, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, return us to you, O God, and yes, we will return, but then we conclude with 3 more words, Chadesh Yamenu Kekedem, restore us, dear God, as we were before. That's what we want. Chadesh Yamenu Kekedem, bring us back to what we had. Shabbat Shuvah reminds us that we need to be returned not only to God, but also to the people right here who make being Jewish the beautiful blessing it is for us, not just at the high holidays, but year-round. I pray we will return, and I believe we will return. And beautiful days lie ahead for all of us here at Beth Yeshurun and in synagogues around the world. And finally, on Shabbat Shuvah, the Sabbath of return, we can ask an even bigger picture question. Can we ever, as human beings, return to the world that we had just 9 months ago? A world in which we shook hands and hugged and embraced one another. A world in which we felt safe, surrounded by people, working with them, holding our babies and our grandparents up close, face to face, sitting with friends and our grandparents up close, sitting with friends in bars and offices and restaurants, without masks, next to each other, close. Can that world exist again when COVID-19 is minimized or we have vaccines to protect us? Many insist that even with vaccines, even with treatments, that people will never be able to go out again as they have. I've had members tell me they will always be afraid going forward. The germs will still be there. The virus will still be there. What can they trust? Who can they trust? I read an essay in the Los Angeles Times last week that predicted we will never feel truly comfortable standing next to people, shaking their hands or giving them hugs. We will never feel comfortable having a doctor examine us in person. We will never feel at home in a crowded stadium or concert hall or sanctuary or sitting in a crowded doctor's office. But I don't accept this. As a congregational rabbi for the last 4 decades, I have lived through many crises. I remember all the news stories just 3 years ago about how Houston will never fully recover from Hurricane Harvey. I remember the prognosticators who insisted during the Great Recession of 2008 that Jewish life in America would never be the same. In both instances, we did recover and even flourish. It didn't happen overnight, but it also did not take forever. We may think that because we're dealing with a virus, it's different, and it's true that every disaster is unique. But I have lived through too many prophecies of doom to truly believe we will not get through this. I'm confident that we will emerge both as a nation and as a Jewish community, impacted to be sure by what has happened, but ready to embrace the world and once again hold each other close. And the reason is because we are human beings. And part of what makes us human is that we need to be with people and to hold and touch one another, to be next to one another. And that cannot be eradicated from the DNA of who we are and how we as human beings have to live. Many years ago, when I was a student at the University of Texas, I took a class in psychology. And my professor wrote a book, one of the few textbooks from my college days that I have kept to this very day. It was called The Social Animal. And in the book, he describes what is it that makes us human. And what I have said summarizes his book. We are made a certain way. We are made to touch and to hug and to hold. There is nothing that will forever keep us from re-embracing the people we love. I'm going to share with you something that I was embarrassed happened, but it happened. Right in our Bark Sanctuary on Rosh Hashanah, when we had the final blowing of the shofar, and our 3 shofar blowers were standing at the Torah Ark. They were coming off the Ark. I was coming off the bimah. We passed each other. One of them stretched out his hand, and I took it. The minute I took his hand, I thought to myself, please, God, this didn't get on camera. Please, God, this isn't being broadcast all over Houston and wherever. Rabbi Rosen is, he's either lost it, or he's oblivious, or he's careless. I'll tell you what Rabbi Rosen was and what our shofar blower was. At that moment, we were human. We were human. He was happy. I was happy. We both felt exhilarated by the blowing of the shofar, and impulsively, we took each other's hands. I'm not recommending everyone go out now and shake each other's hands. We have the sanitizing fluid right up there on the bimah. But you know what it reminded me? I'm not going to have to remember how to shake hands. I'm not going to have to remember that I shake hands. When the time comes, I'm going to be shaking and hugging and holding and kissing my grandchildren and my family and many of you, because that's what makes us human. Are we going to reach that day? I believe we will. And it's not that far off. And it's going to happen because we are using everything in our power to create the medical conditions that will make us able to feel more at home and safe in our skins and in our world. I am confident that we are going to return to our synagogues, and we're going to return to the world, and we're going to return to God as soon as we can, because that's how we were made to be. We as a people have made our own futures many times. We have risen from despair and destruction to reach new heights over and over again. And I firmly believe that our nation and our Jewish people and our world will survive the coronavirus. And on this Shabbat of return, I not only pray for that return, I predict it. Back to God, with whom our relationship transcends time and space. Back to our synagogues, because our tradition teaches Jewish life can only be celebrated with other people. And we cannot exist as Jews without one another. And back into the world, because we cannot and will not live any other way, because that's what our DNA compels us to do. When new treatments drop the mortality rate of COVID-19, as they already are beginning to do, when a vaccine decreases the likelihood of ever contracting the disease, or at least lowering the risk of it, I have faith we will return to the fullness of life for which we all so yearn. So let us be optimistic and let us be hopeful. Let us be prepared to embrace it when that day comes, for I am positive it will. This year, as every year, we will end Yom Kippur with the Tekiyah Gedolah of the shofar, and we will sing out and shout L'Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, to which this year I will add, next year in Jerusalem, and next year together, all of us in our shul, next year together with our families arm in arm, or as the popular song has it, Od tirei kama tov yihiyeh. Just you wait and see, just you see what a world it will be next year. Shabbat Shalom.